bore you now and move on, and I'd like to introduce Ollie Bray.
Thanks very much for that introduction. You can probably tell from my voice that I'm not actually from Scotland originally. In fact, I'm from Weymouth, and I'm currently 6 months closer to home than I have ever been before. And unfortunately, since my mum has joined Facebook, I've not been able to send out any tweets or Facebook messages saying what I've done. Otherwise, she would insist that straight after this meeting, instead of going back home to my home, I would be down to visit her. It's been quite a bizarre outing, really. So what am I? Well, my substantive post is Deputy Head Teacher at Musselburgh Grammar School in East Lothian. It's a truly comprehensive school. We don't have traditional grammar schools in Scotland. But about 2.5 years ago, I was seconded to Learning and Teaching Scotland, which is our national agency in Scotland responsible for the 3 to 18 curriculum, to do some work on the new curriculum, and also to have a responsibility for what we call emerging technologies in learning. And the specific project that I work on is called the Consolarium, which is really to look at games-based learning in education. So that's where a lot of my work is. And then from November this year, I was seconded from my secondment, if that makes any sense at all, because I'm sometimes getting my head around it myself, to do between 2 and 4 days work a week with the Scottish Government, because they're looking to develop a technologies for learning strategy for Scotland, which will be published at the end of July. And I think it's quite interesting because obviously with the differences in education systems between the Scottish system and the English system down here, I think in Scotland we've got a real buy-in, certainly from the current government, to embrace technologies and technologies for learning in schools. So I guess why am I here and why am I talking about Wikipedia? Well, you know, as a classroom teacher, and my subject is geography originally, you know, I've used Wikipedia with students to get them to edit articles, and also with students, obviously, as reference sources as well. And I'm a huge believer in the fact that we need to make sure that children and young people know how to use the internet responsibly, and I think that includes Wikipedia and a whole other variety of tools as well. So as part of this work, a couple of years ago now, I did a presentation at the Handheld Learning Festival in London, and I was talking specifically about social media in schools. And I have to say I was a little bit on my high horse during this presentation because it had just been at the start of my secondment, and I'd been out to a local education authority, which will remain nameless, who had told me that they'd actually blocked Wikipedia in all of their schools because it might not be factually accurate. At which point I kind of thought to myself, well, regardless of whether it's factually accurate or not, unless we can guarantee that we're going to be blocking it at home as well, then presumably children are still going to use it, and how are we going to teach them to use it responsibly if it's blocked in schools? So that was kind of a big thrust and focus of my presentation during that particular talk, which then resulted in another article which I wrote, which was about should schools use Wikipedia, when I broadened some of the kind of research evidence and, you know, and talked about some of the benefits of using wiki technology and Wikipedia and the whole kind of business of open source. At that point, the Times Educational Supplement in Scotland picked up on that article and it produced a really, really good headline, which was Wikipedia is good for pupils and teachers. And then another newspaper in Scotland picked up on the Times Educational Supplement newspaper article with the headline, Scottish teacher encourages pupils with unreliable Wikipedia. Isn't the media great? At which point it all started to go absolutely crazy because there was a Radio Scotland interview where they had that awful journalist from the Times, the one that really hates their Wikipedia, some of you will know him, that basically said that this teacher from Musselburgh Grammar School was basically saying that young people should have access to unreliable information, etc., 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 which prompted John Connell, who was one of the heads of emerging markets at Cisco System, to say that basically the BBC was completely rubbish and why on earth would they broadcast these things without the same system. Eventually, it got to my local newspaper. All right? Now, you may not have heard of this one. It's called the East Lothian Courier, which is then broadcasting an article called School Web Controversy. And it's a really, really interesting article, and I think it's a great example of media literacy, because if you read that article and look at the comments underneath, there are about 20 odd comments there in complete support for what I was saying, and it's just a great example actually of bad journalism, you know, more than anything else, because both myself and the so-called expert from the Scottish Parents Teacher Council were basically both arguing the same point, is that children should access a variety of sources and should be able to digitally, you know, or verify their sources in any place. So that's kind of like I guess my background and my initial kind of soiree in this situation. But I come at this very much from a teacher and learning point of view, and I still, you know, maintain myself as a teacher more than anything else. And I'm kind of, you know, very much of this opinion, and have been for a while, that really good teachers use good tools. And good teachers should be allowed to use the good tools that are appropriate for them, and also for their students. And I think if we stick to that very basic premise to start with, then we can do wonderful things in classrooms, not just with social media or the internet, but also other technologies as well. And I kind of think that, if we're really going to get teachers and schools and pupils to embrace Wikipedia, we maybe need to stop talking about Wikipedia. And I know that is a funny thing to say at a Wikipedia conference, and I'm not suggesting that we dismiss it completely, all right? But what I actually think is that what we should be talking about to teachers, to get teachers to buy into these things, is we should be talking about good learning and teaching. Because surely the use of Wikipedia and being able to look through different articles and be able to verify sources and to get young people to assess these sources, that's an example of good learning and teaching which young people need in 2011. All right? And when people talk about 21st century skill, they say, well, what have you been doing for the last 11 years? Right, it's 2011 now, we need to actually embrace some of these issues. And I kind of think that most teachers will get buy-in, if we go back to actually the very, very basics of learning. And I kind of think that, well, for good learning to occur, first of all, we need good pedagogy. We do need good teachers, however that's delivered, whether that's online or whether that's face-to-face, and I think there's a place for both. And secondly, we need activities that are both interesting and engaging. And sometimes just interesting or sometimes just engaging. And for those of you that are teachers or have had any experience in teaching in the primary or secondary school system, you will know that if you're teaching a subject which your class is interested in, and you can combine that with good pedagogy, that learning will flourish. Right? If you have to teach the Common Agricultural Policy, which I did as a geography teacher, right, then sometimes people can't see the relevance of that, in which case we need to see about how do we put that across in an engaging way. And I think there's a place for both of these things. And I think that actually, by its very definition, Wikipedia is one of these interesting and it's also an engaging thing. Because there's lots of things in there that young people are interested in, but there's also certain aspects, I think, that are fascinating about Wikipedia and other similar technology, which makes it really, really engaging as well. And I think if we go back to these sort of basic pedagogical principles, then that's when we get teachers to buy in, and once they've bought in, then they start to use the technology more safely, more effectively, and more responsibly in the classroom. Because without doubt, if we were, I think one of the things that really gets young people to buy in is the whole idea of cultural relevance. One of the reasons why I've done a lot of work with commercially available off-the-shelf computer games and games consoles in the classroom is because they're culturally relevant for children and young people. And therefore, because they're culturally relevant, then young people are motivated by them. And if we look at the different brands, or a number of different brands here, I think that Wikipedia is an example of a cultural brand. All primary school children, right, all primary school children pretty much in the UK have only ever grown up with Wikipedia. Right, so in a completely different situation compared to perhaps some of the teachers that they're teaching towards the end of their career. How do we capitalise on that advantage, and use that? And of course, I think the other fascinating thing about Wikipedia as well is its ability to be able to update almost in real time. Wasn't it fascinating? A couple of weeks ago when we had the tsunami in Japan. Now, this is a great resource for teachers. And one of the reasons it's a great resource for teachers is because aggregating content, reference content from other parts of the world to save them actually going out to find it in the first place. And it's maybe thinking about how can we use some of these pages differently in order to help a teacher with their planning and also to pass this information on to students. And I think as well, one of the things about Wikipedia, particularly if we talk about editing Wikipedia articles, is that these are kind of real and relevant skills. I was in the airport this morning at God knows what time, and I was collaborating on a Google document with a colleague that was over in the United States. Right? That's how we work now. It's collaboration, it's joint writing, for both of the time. It's working together in this kind of, partnership work. And I think one of probably the greatest strengths of Wikipedia and some of these technologies for children and young people is this whole idea as well about trying to give authentic audience for young people's work. Let's take an example. So, let's say, for example, right, I want you to go away and research something and write this up in your book, and then probably not show it to anybody else at all. Or I want you to go away and research something and find a gap in Wikipedia and publish it to the largest encyclopedia in the world. Now, that's an empowering thing. Right? That's an empowering thing, and it's perfectly possible as well, because the other thing that Wikipedia is obviously very good at is this whole idea of niche markets, isn't it? And some of these niche markets on the local level, are very, very capable, I think, of young people or any kind of Wikipedians. And here's an example. This is an article here. I took this screenshot in 2006 of the River Esk, in East Lothian. You might think, why am I showing you that? There's probably some people in there thinking that's a really, really bad article. Why would he put that there as a model of good practice? But it's an interesting thing because there's lots of riveresques obviously over the UK, and this is, you can kind of see that there. Isn't it one of Microsoft's best kept secrets that whole of the Ordnance Survey maps are available for free?